All right, hello and welcome back. Rounding out tonight's last day and last hour, we have John Dannreuther, who has been a numismatist for over 50 years, and we'll be discussing the Little Princess, a discussion about the striking format for the 1841 Quarter Eagle. Thank you for hopping on, John.
Thank you. I'd like to welcome everyone to the presentation. And also I'd like to thank NNP, the Newman Numismatic Portal, for putting this on. I know Matthew, Liana, Lynn, everyone has worked very hard, and this has been very successful. I've watched quite a few of these, and I'm looking forward to viewing others that I missed when they're posted on the so I guess we should start. All right. This is a discussion about the striking format for the 1841 Quarter Eagle, the Little Princess. This will be in two parts. The first part will be very short. It's the written evidence about the 41 Quarter Eagle. The second part will be the main part of the discussion, which is the die evidence. So the written evidence is scant. In 1841, these coins were struck. Dr. Robert Maskell Patterson was the mint director. He was appointed in 1835, lasted till 1851, and he was a stickler for mint regulations and procedures. He didn't like coins struck in years that weren't accurate with the date on coins. In fact, before he got there, there was an 1830 half dime that was struck in 1833, and we know this because it used the same reverses in 1833, but it was a later die state. So he stopped these types of things from going on. And the first evidence we have is actually the absence of evidence. They weren't listed in the mint report, and coins that were struck for circulation were listed in the mint report, and they were delivered from the chief coiner to the treasurer and recorded in journals. Proofs were off the record, main records, and there probably was a proof journal, but it's no longer located. So that's the first written evidence, or lack of written evidence. And in 1860, James Ross Snowden was the mint director. He was the mint director from 1853 to 1861. He was the mint treasurer starting in 1847. But in 1860, he published a book called The Mint Manual of All Nations. And this book listed all the coins that were in the mint cabinet. And at that point in time, Snowden called the 1841 Quarter Eagle. He looked at the records and could find no record of it. He called it a pattern. Today, we call patterns coins that were struck from dies that were never used, never adopted. But the word pattern had a different meaning in the 19th century. In the 1887 Mint Report, the pattern piece was described as an early specimen or proof from a newly adopted coinage die or dies. Well, certainly 1841 Quarter Eagles fit that bill. The Liberty Head Quarter Eagle was started in 1840. So in 1841, it was a newly adopted coinage die. So that's, his opinion was that it was a proof in 1860 because he found no record of it. They've always been cataloged as proofs. That doesn't mean that much because obviously coins are miscatalogued all the time, but this coin has been cataloged up until recently only as proofs. Now, the die evidence, I've had a personal mantra for the last few years, and that is, just as DNA evidence overrules eyewitness testimony in court cases, die evidence will supersede written evidence in numismatics. The physical evidence always trumps written evidence or eyewitness evidence. So the background for this die evidence, I've discussed the three eras of proof coinage. These periods are pretty well defined. Pre-1840 coinage was the master coin period, I call. You can call them proofs, you can call them specimens, even you can call them patterns. All those words meant the same thing. But the pre-1840 period was dominated by proofs or master coins struck from regular circulation dies. There are a few proof-only dies prior to 1840, 1827 quarter comes to mind, JR 10 dimes. There's a few large cents, but most of the pre-1840 coinage proofs were made from circulation dies. They would polish up the dies, polish up a few planchets, and strike a few proofs. There was not much demand for them, so that was the simplest thing to do. And sometimes they used dies that were fresh, that had never struck coins, and other times they took dies that had been striking coins and polished them up. There's 1830 large cent has die cracks on it. The JR 10 dime has a die crack on the reverse. So they didn't pay as much attention to it as later. The next period is the 1840 to 1859 period. And that's interesting because at this point, they switched over and started using proof-only reverse dies. All through this period, the dies were, and sometimes the obverse dies were proof-only, like for the half cents and certain other coins. This period was dominated by a lack of demand until the latter part of it. The coins were sold at face value or intrinsic value. After 1853, the dollar actually contained more silver than the half dimes, the dimes, the quarters, and halves. So they charged $1.08, the intrinsic value. In 1859, they struck 800 silver proof sets and 80 gold sets, but they were sold at face value. So there was really no risk to the people who bought them. If they didn't sell them, they could spend them. The last period is the normal proof period, 1860 and later. They started charging for proof coins. A silver proof set was $3. It contained $1.94 face value, but $2.02 intrinsic value because you had to add the 8 cents for the silver dollar. It was $1.08. The gold set was $43. It contained $41.50 worth of gold. So who instituted, we're going to look at the 1840 period. Obviously, that's when the 1841 quarter eagle was struck. Benjamin Franklin Peale, better known as Franklin Peale, became the chief coiner when Adam Eckfeldt retired in 1839. Franklin Peale had been hired earlier in 1833 to travel to Europe to look at the European mints. The Industrial Revolution was in full swing, and he went to the foreign mints, mainly the Paris Mint and the Royal Mint in London, to look at the machinery that they were using. And he brought back two interesting and very useful items. One was the Tour à Portrait, the Contamine portrait lathe that was bought in 1836 and installed in early 1837. And this device allowed them to take plaster models and make metal galvanos, either out of copper or steel. And with a tracing device on the center of it, it moved in concentric circles, and through a series of reducing gears, had a cutting tool that cut whatever the model was, whether it was the Liberty head or an eagle, onto a die, a piece of steel. And that became the hub. And from that hub, they were able to make a master die and added the stars and the lettering and had everything but the date installed onto the working hub. So that working hub would then be used to make multiple working dies. Also, he brought back a drawing of a steam-powered coining press. And from that, they were able to build a steam press that they installed in, well, it was installed in early 1836. They didn't get it working in February. It took them to March to get it to work. But that became the main press that they started using to strike the circulation coins. That press is still in existence. It's on display at the ANA. We're going back to before 1840, as I noted, proofs were almost exclusively struck from circulation strike dies. I picked the most common pre-1840 coin to discuss. It's the 1837 No Stars proof dime. Both proofs and circulation strikes were struck from the same die pair. And we know they were struck on 3 occasions. And I'll explain why we know that, but I did a study of these coins, and I found that one group has about 5 degrees counterclockwise rotation, another group has about 10 degrees counterclockwise rotation, And there's about 14 to 16 of those that I found. And then the most common one was the one with 15 degrees clockwise rotation. That was struck last because the obverse die cracked. It cracked right down here at the foot. It later cracked all the way across and then bisected down on the circulation strikes that were struck after the last proof. Well, why do they have different alignments? At this point in time, the dies were lined up in the die cups by sight. In other words, the workman would take the die, an obverse or a reverse die, put it in a die cup and align it what he thought was perpendicular. He would line it straight up and down, but he always sometimes missed by a few degrees. And that's why we have 3 different occasions that the 1837 dime was struck, because we have 3 different rotations. And these rotations are very consistent. They are exactly the same for the 3 different striking periods. So once they tightened the set screws on the die, they would take the die cup and it bolted into the screw press or into the steam press when they were striking circulation coins. And it never moved. But if the set screws came loose, the dies could rotate. But striking 15 or 20 proofs, it's very, very unlikely that the dies were going to rotate. And so what does this have to do with quarter eagles? Well, another Franklin Peel innovation was holding over the undated proof-only dies from year to year. This started in 1840. We know this because some of them were discovered years ago. The half cents were discovered to have original and restrike reverses used on all the 1840s half cents. That was discovered in the 1800s. I believe it was around the 1880s. The silver dollars were discovered to have common reverses sometimes in the early 1900s. I've never been able to figure out exactly when, but it was discovered after 1900. So I had questioned why, if they use half cents and dollar reverses, proof onlys, did they use any others? And at the 1982 Eliasberg sale, I was very lucky. I sat next to Harry Bass for 2 days, and he was the die expert at the time. He owned over 600 pre-1835 quarter eagles, half eagles, and eagles. He had virtually complete collections of these coins. He had all 29 quarter eagles. He had 133 out of the 145 half eagles. He had 32 out of the 33 eagles. So he was a die expert. So I was looking at auction lots, and I noticed the 1841 and 1846 proof quarter eagles in the Eliasberg sale looked like they had the same reverse. So I started, I got my magnifying glass out and I started looking at them, and I said, you know, I think these are the same reverses. So I showed them to Harry Bass, and those of you who knew Harry Bass knew that he always wore his glasses when he looked at coins, and he had 2 little magnifying glasses on the edge of his eyeglasses, and he would flip down one to see at 1 power, and if he needed to really zoom in on a coin, he would flip down the second one. So he started looking at the 41, and he would look at the 41, then he looked at the 46, and he would look back at the 41, and I was thinking, well, maybe I'm wrong, maybe they aren't the same. But then he flipped down the second magnifying glass, and I went, I think I'm right. And he looked at them for a few more minutes, and then he looked over at me and he says, you're correct, those are the same reverses. Well, I had suspected this, but this was the first proof that I had that the quarter eagles might have used the same reverses. So this was a decades-long quest to prove the other denominations use proof-only dies. I was lucky that the Pittman sale happened in 1998. Right before that, Jeff Garrett and I had gone to the Smithsonian, and I looked at, I would believe it was 1997, and I looked at all of the proof gold coins from the 1840s, the quarter eagles, the half eagles, and the eagles. And I'd figured out at that point in time that all of those used common proof reverse dies. So I knew the goal was. Phil Kaufman had virtually completed the Liberty seated collection of proofs. He had from 1837 to 1891, he was only missing 3 coins. I once said, nobody will ever best Phil Kaufman's set. Well, of course, whenever you make a statement, somebody comes along, and obviously Dr. Gene Gardner got almost complete. He was missing 1 coin. out of that set from 1837 to 1891. So I wrote an article after I got to examine the Phil Kaufman collection. Barry Stumpler told me before a Long Beach show, come out to Woodland Hills. I'll have Phil bring his coins over and you can look at them. You can examine, spend as much time as you want. So I spent several hours at Barry's office looking at Phil's half dimes and quarters and half dollars. I didn't need to look at the dollars. I knew they had used a common reverse. That was common knowledge. But I was able to figure out that the half dimes, the dimes, the quarters, and half dollars all use common reverse dies. Now, a few of them, they changed the design and they had to change the reverse die, and a few of them cracked. The 1843 half dollar cracked, so they had to replace that reverse. It was used from 44 to 46, and it cracked again. 1846 proof half dollars used two different reverses. They used the reverse of 1844 and a new reverse that was installed in 1846 that was used for 46, 47, 48, 49, 50, and 52 half dollars. So those proofs are proof-only dies that were used past 1849. So what about these proof-only dies? Well, as far as I know, none of them were used for anything other than proofs. So they must have kept them in a separate room or a separate spot in the die room. So they brought them out each year and struck proofs from them. So let's just say that they did use the 41 quarter eagle dies for circulation strikes. What are we looking for? Well, as noted, the mint director was a stickler, that was Dr. Patterson, was a stickler for mint regulations. So if they struck circulation strikes, they would have been listed in the mint report. They were not listed. Well, the second thing is the circulation strike theorists believe that the variance in striking quality means the well-struck coins are proof and the weakly struck ones are circulation strike. Well, there's a problem with that argument. If they struck circulation strikes, they would have been struck on the steam press and they would all be the same strike. They wouldn't be a variance in strike. The different striking features indicates they were struck on the hand-powered screw press. So that actually, their theory actually proves the opposite of what they think it proves. That press was variously called the large press, the dollar press, the metal press. It was acquired in 1795. It weighed about 3,500 pounds, and it was delivered to the mint. It was built by the Samuel Howell Company. It's also called the Howell Press. And all proofs were struck on this press until the 1890s, at least all the large size proofs. Whether some of the smaller coins like half dimes and 3-cent nickels and 3-cent silvers were struck on the hand operated press, but that's debatable. But certainly silver dollars, half dollars, quarters, quarter eagles, half eagles, eagles, double eagles, all of those were struck on the large screw press until the 1890s. So now we're going to look at some of the coins. So here's the 1840 quarter eagle. I have pictures of all of the NNC, the National Numismatic Collection quarter eagles. The pictures were taken by Tom Mulvaney, and certainly I got permission from the Smithsonian to use them. But it's very interesting. The 1840 quarter eagle in the Smithsonian is the worst struck of the ones in the 1840s. And there's two reasons for that. The main reason is when they lap the dies, they lap and polish the dies to first basten them to make them slightly convex, because the dies, they didn't want flat dies. The coins would stick to the dies. And they also had to make the coins proof-like. So they had to use a polishing compound to finish off the dies to make them proof-like. They first had pickled them in acid to frost them, and then they lapped them and polished them to get them. It's interesting, this coin is very weakly struck in the neck area, the leg area. The shield is blended into it. And if you'll notice on the obverse, the hair curls are weak there, they're weak here, they're weak over the ear. All of those hair strands are not fully struck. Two reasons. Like I said, this was struck on a hand-operated press, and these are deep parts of the die. What causes the weakness in strike usually is the metal does not flow into the deep recesses of the die. Now, you'll notice the lettering is real fat and solid, so it flowed into that with no problem. The lettering is opposite the stars, so it really didn't have a problem flowing into that area. Now, it's interesting. These don't look like the same dies. So this is the 1840 quarter eagle close-up of the last S of states of the Smithsonian coin. And this is the 1841 quarter eagle. This particular die line is on all the 1841 through 48 quarter eagles. So there were two known, however, there are, whoops, I went too fast. There are two known 1840 quarter eagles. The NNC coin, which is before the lapping, and the Pittman coin, which was after the lapping. So the Pittman coin has a reverse that looks like this. And you say, why does the S look so different? Well, it's very difficult to explain, but if you think about it, what's raised on the coin is incuse on the die. So when they lap this die, they actually removed the lower part of the metal as far as the coin is concerned, but it's actually the upper part of the die. And as you remove the metal, it actually narrows the area where the letters are. And you see this on dates, where dates get thinned out on coins in the Liberty Seated series and other series, because when they lap the dies, they actually remove metal. You're putting steel against a zinc lapping plate, and it actually takes part of the metal away. So you might say, well, how do I know that these are the same dies? Well, there's an interesting phenomenon that happened before they got a different lathe. The Contamine portrait lathe it would not transfer the vertical shield lines as well as the Hill lathe that was introduced in 1867. So what they did is they would take each die, each working die, and strengthen these vertical lines. And by doing so, they created, sometimes they extended these vertical lines up into the horizontal shield. And if you'll look, you'll notice that all these vertical lines are identical. So that's how we know that these dies are the same dies, despite the fact that the S's look so different. In fact, all the letters look different. Another feature, again, I didn't mean to hit that button. Another feature is what we call lap dishing. These little raised areas of metal here, I used to think was caused by was polish buildup, but in actuality, if it's raised on the coin, it's incuse on the die. So when they lap the dies, they actually dug out a little bit of the metal at the bottom of the shield, and that appears as raised metal because it's gone. The metal's gone, and on the die, it's missing, and on the coin, it appears raised. So, in fact, all of the 1840s shield dies, which were the quarters, half dollars, dollars, and all the gold coins, I was able to, that was the feature I used to identify the common proof reverses in the 1840s. The extensions on the quarters, the half dollars, the dollars, the quarter eagles, the half eagles, and the eagles, they all have extended vertical shield lines, and they're different on each coin and each die. So if they have the exact same extensions, it's the same die. When it changes, that like in 1846 half dollars, one die is the reverse of 44. It has one set of extended shield lines, and the reverse of 46 has another set. So we know that that lapping helped the strike. And how do we know that? Look how thin the letters are for this date. This is 1841 quarter eagle from the Smithsonian. Look how thin the date is. The lettering is compared to the 1840. The 1840 lettering was big and fat. The S's were connected, the serifs connected to the center part. This allowed the strike to be much better. There are two things that cause the strike. One is the pressure, and the two men swinging the arms of the screw press. If they didn't swing it hard enough, the coin wouldn't be well struck. You'll see that on the next few coins. If the dies were not basined properly, then that's the reason the New Orleans dies have weak breast feathers. New Orleans silver dollar dies have weak breast feathers, not from weakness of strike, because they were all struck on screw presses at 120 tons. Every coin had the exact same pressure. So it was the basoning of the dies that causes the weak breast feathers on Morgan silver dollars from New Orleans, as opposed to San Francisco or Carson or Philadelphia, Carson City. All of those have well-struck breast feathers. They basten their dies right. So we got a well-struck 1841 quarter eagle. And in fact, the next date, excuse me, that's the 42. I skipped the 41, I guess. The 42 is very well struck. Let's go back to the 41. It's well struck, but it does have a little bit of weakness in here. The 42 is actually the best struck quarter eagle in the 1840s. So they got it right on this coin. The men that were swinging the arms struck this coin as well as it could be struck. You got full hair curls up here. Look at this hair curl under here. Complete detail on this little swoop of hair there. And you got a little bit of weakness here, a little bit of weakness there, but this is the best struck coin. 1843 quarter eagle, it's jumping around on me, is weakly struck. Again, you got not as bad as the 1840, but it is weakly struck. The 44, same thing, weakly struck in this area. The guys swinging the arms didn't strike it like they did the 42. The 45, better struck. You got a little bit of weakness here, but not too bad. I mean, I would consider that a well-struck coin. The hair curls are good, not as good as the 42. And the 46, again, weakness. You got the shield, the left shield line, the feathers, and then the 47, better. Not too bad a strike. You got some weakness in there. And then a 48, it's weak again. None of them are as weak as the 1840 because they'd lapped the dies and the bastoning was much better. So you didn't have quite the depth of the die, so the metal flowed better into that. So for just examples, I put a couple of other coins in here. Here's the 1856 quarter eagle, a really rare coin. There's only 3 or 4 known from the Smithsonian. It does still have a little bit of weakness. Remember, this was struck on a screw press. So how well the men, or how strong the men were and how well they swung the arms determined the strike. Now look at this coin. This is an 1896 quarter eagle. This is what they're supposed to look like. This was probably struck on a hydraulic press. We don't know the exact changeover date. We know that by 1903, there is a mention of a quick-acting hydraulic press used for small proofs and metals. So we know that at least by 1903, they were using hydraulic presses to strike proofs. It's probably 1894 when they started using them for all the other coins. Certainly after 1893, the Morgan dollars are all well struck. So here's the die evidence. If they had struck 100 to 300 1841 quarter eagles, the reverse die would have need to be refurbished. You cannot strike 300 coins or 100 coins even with a proof die and have it be in perfect condition. And since we know that the die state did not change from mid-1840 to 1848, it'd be impossible for them to strike a couple of 100 coins and not have to, with this die pair. And since all 1841 quarter eagles, all the ones known, are from the same die pair, they would have had to refurbish it. They probably would have had to refrost it because it would have lost the frost. Just like Morgan dollars, DMPO Morgan dollars. You get the frosty, deep mirrored proofs, proof-likes, and then what happens is you lose that proof-like surface and you end up, instead of a DMPL, you end up with a PL, and then eventually you lose that and you have a frosty surface. So as you just saw, all the 1840s quarter eagles have varying striking quality. And as I mentioned, 2 things that determine whether a coin is fully struck. The pressure from the press, the 2 men turning the arms varied each strike. Sometimes it might give it 100 tons, sometimes 160 tons. The 1842 quarter eagle, I think they used 150 tons. It's fully struck. And then the depth of the dies. What I was talking about earlier, the 1840, the pre-lap coin in the Smithsonian versus the Pittman coin, and in all the coins struck after that. They all also have the same rotation. Just like the 1837 dimes, the dies were aligned by sight. So the 1841 quarter eagles, we know that they were all struck at the same time. That doesn't mean they were all proofs, but it just means that they struck proofs, and then could they have struck other things? Possibly. But this is again, I'm showing you this to remind you, this is the pre-strike, the pre-lap die with real thick lettering and weak strike. And here's the post-lap. So the Pittman coin had the post-lap, which was, its strike was consistent with the other ones. Okay, so maybe they struck a few 1841 proof quarter eagles, and then they decided to strike more. And so they just struck them on the screw press. So they fed the unpolished blanks into the screw press. That's possible, but if they'd struck regular issue coins and delivered them, they would have had to report them in their mint report, and they weren't reported. Yes, I know there's some people who say, well, they reported them in January of 1842. Well, Patterson would not have allowed that. Director Patterson, at the end of each quarter, the mint treasurer had to balance his books. He had to report the amount of coinage that he had received from the chief coiner and how much he had delivered to banks and to the customers who had submitted the gold and silver to be struck into coins. And the proof mintages, as I noted, were kept in a separate journal. Fortunately, this journal did not survive, or we would be certain of the number of proofs that they struck. Possibly some coins were struck not as proofs, but for presentation for a special event. I believe Dave Bowers mentioned this at one point, that he thought that maybe there was some special event and the recipients kept them as pocket pieces. That's possible, but there's no event that's been discovered that this happened. So the biggest argument that, or the best argument that the circulation strike theorists have is that there's just too many 1841 quarter eagles. All the others, 1840 only has 2 known, 48 has 2 known. The other dates in there, the most known of any date, I believe, is 5 or 6 coins. At least 6 coins is the most of any date. But there's 15 or 18 1841 quarter eagles. And they say, well, it's just too many coins. But there are other denominations in the 1840s that have more proof examples known than other years. Interestingly, the 1841 half cents and cents have way more than some of the other dates. In fact, they're probably the most common of the half cents and large cents in the 1840s, at least for the originals. Not talking about restrikes here, because that's a different story. But the original reverse that was struck in 1841. Interesting, they're dated the same as the quarter eagles. So why are there more 41 half cents, large cents, and quarter eagles? We don't know. But there is an analogy to a similar situation with the 1870s Liberty-seated dollars. We saw this a few years ago. John Frost and Dick Osborne figured this out. There are about 9 known. That's another coin that was specially struck, and it's not included in the mint report. The 70s dollars were likely struck for presentation to the Masons who participated in the cornerstone laying ceremony for the new San Francisco Mint on May 25th, 1870. There was a parade down the streets to where the cornerstone was going to be laid. There's supposedly 25,000 people participated. The Masons led the parade, and they were decked out in their full regalia with their sashes and everything. And it's very likely they were given these coins as souvenirs of the ceremony. And the 70s dollars have pocket piece wear like the 1841 quarter eagles. Virtually all of the 41 quarter eagles and the 70s dollars are high grade. They're VF to AU. And both of them have a single low grade example. In fact, the good 4 or proof 4, they called it, in the A&A sale this year, the 1841 quarter eagle just sold. The 70s dollars, like I said, they're all high grade also. So what does all of this mean? Well, we can't be certain. All we know is they weren't listed in the mint report. That's a big strike against them because all the circulation strikes were listed in the mint report. And certainly under Dr. Patterson, who was a stickler for this, he made sure that all of the regular issue coins were dated the year they were struck, and they were delivered from the chief coiner to the mint cashier or treasurer, and he recorded them in his journal. They both recorded. It was called a pattern by Snowden in 1860. Pattern at the time meant proof or specimen. So certainly this is only 19 years after these coins were struck, and he could find no record of them. And so he concluded that they were proofs. You know, you know, the only thing the only coin he had to look at was the one in the Smithsonian. Well, excuse me, at the time it was in the Mint cabinet. It wasn't transferred till the 1920s to the Smithsonian. But he saw that coin and said, well, they struck them improved. They all have pocket piece wear, except for the one low grade one. And it's very difficult to describe the difference in pocket piece wear and regular circulation. But the best way to describe it is a coin that someone carried in the pocket tends to have a little bit smoother surface. The nicks and scratches are a little bit different than a coin that actually went into circulation and it was in a bag. Remember, if they struck a couple of hundred of these, well, actually at that time they were shipped out in kegs, but they would have jostled around and they would have gotten bag marks on them. But all the 1841 quarter eagles and the 70s seated dollars tend to have pocket piece wear. And the most damning thing to me is that they all have the same die state from the post lap in the middle of 1840 to 1848. Like I said earlier, if they had struck hundreds of coins, 100 to 200 to 300 coins, they would have had to refurbish the dies. I think they would have had to refrost them, which would be pickle them in mild acid, and lap the dies again. And that did not happen. We know that because of the Pittman coin, and that's the thing that really made me believe that they were all proofs, because there are two die states in 1840. The pre-lap, which is the Smithsonian coin, which is very poorly struck, but it has the very thick lettering on it. And then the post-lap Pittman coin, which has the same die state as the 1841, 42, 43, all of the ones in the 40s. And the final thing is the die alignment. They all have the same die alignment. That means they were all struck at the same time. You know, the odds of the guy lining up the dies exactly the same 2 times in a row are minuscule. It could happen, but probably not. Now, does that mean that some of the coins were struck as proofs and then they fed some blanks in there and struck some more? That's possible too. I mentioned that earlier. We can't know that, because once a coin is worn down past XF or AU, XF, you really can't tell whether that coin was struck as a proof or not. We do know they were struck from the same dies, and so we do know they had the same die alignment, so they were likely struck at the same time. Now, proving the coins were proofs or mint state or circulation strike is very difficult either way. I think I presented the evidence that's pretty convincing, but the circulation strike theorists have their ideas that there's too many coins. A friend of mine, David McCarthy, mentioned that if he owned any other date in the 1840s that looked like the XF and AU 1841 quarter eagles, he would fight tooth and nail forever to get it put into a proof 55 or a 58 holder. He would never give up, he said. And I agree with him, because they look like circulated proofs. Now, to Doug Winter and the David Hall and some of the circulation strike theorists, they think they look like mint state coins. You know, I disagree, but you know, there's always disagreements in numismatics because none of us were there when it happened, and so we don't know what happened. And on one side, you have Ron Guth, you've got Craig Shawley, Saul Teisman. We're all they're all struck as proofs. And the other side, you've got some great people. The late Dave Akers believed that they struck circulation strikes. David Hall believes that. I believe Jeff Garrett believes that. I'm not sure about Jeff, but I do know that you know, Doug Winter believes that they struck them in the circulation strike. But you know, people can disagree. You know, and no one can prove definitively that they're right, or that I'm right, or that I'm wrong, or they're wrong. So now we're going to open it up for discussion, for questions from the back to the main menu. All right, there we
Absolutely. All right.
are. Here we are.
looks like this first question would like to know, on the 1842, what is going on with the metal in front of the nose? Here, I actually have that.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing on the 1842 quarter eagle. I'm not sure. It's been so long since I've actually physically looked at it. It's been probably 10 years because the first time I looked at it was 1997. I believe that's a planchet imperfection. Certainly not in the dies. At least I don't believe it was the die. That's a little. You see that quite often in the early coinage, early proof coinage, where the dies, where the planchets, after they burnished them and polished them, you would have little imperfections. And I believe that's an imperfection there. Or it could be that that's something that happened post-strike. That's something that somebody dropped something, so a little drop of acid or something that somehow got on the coin. Remember, these have been, that coin's been in the collection since 1842. So it's luckily to be in the condition that it's in. It's in, as far as I'm concerned, it's pristine condition. Yes, it does have a little area in front of it, the face there.
Absolutely. Following up, great presentation. The strongest argument for proof status seems to be that the same reverse die is used as for the other 1840s proof quarter eagles. Your work on the 1840s proof silver coinage is consistent with this argument.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, that's the strongest argument, I think, besides the fact that all the die pair, is that there are no other coins in the 1840s from half cents through $10 gold pieces where any of those proof-only dies were used for anything other than proofs. There's no coins that I'm aware of from half cents, large cents, half dimes, quarters, halves, silver dollars, all the gold coins. As far as I know, they're only used for proofs. Now, the obverses are different. Some of the obverses were used for circulation strikes, but the proof-only reverses were obviously held in a special area of the mint vault where they kept the dies. They were kept under lock and key, of course, and they brought them out each year and struck the coins. The fact that the die state didn't change from mid-1840 through 1848 also lends a lot of credence to the proof theory.
Oh, wow. That's a whole lot. That's awesome. Following up, must sign off. Just wanted to say thanks to everyone, but for John, great explanation regarding excessive lapping will cause letters and numbers to look weaker and especially thinner. I was stunned at what some people were paying the thin date, large cents that were simply coins struck from lap dies.
Yeah, that's true. As they had to lap dies, sometimes dies clashed and other things happened, injuries to dies, and they would pull them out of the press and lap them. And when they did that, they removed metal. And when you remove metal around a date, you've removed the widest part of the date. That's the easiest way to say it. And so the date appears to be shallow and narrower. And it doesn't appear to be, it is shallower and narrower because you've removed metal.
Interesting. Following up, for the 1841 quarter eagle, what is the lowest preservation state you have been able to document? What is your...
There was the good 4 just sold in the Heritage A&A auction in August of this year. And all the rest of them are VF, XF, and AUs, mainly XF and AUs. They're mainly high grade. And as I said, they appear to have pocket piece wear. They appear to have been given to non-numismatic people. Now, was there an event in 1841 that somebody came into the mint and asked for 15 quarter eagles to give out? I don't know. You know, nobody knows. We don't know why they struck extra coins. The question is were the extra coins that they struck, were they struck for circulation or were they struck as proofs? And if they struck several hundred coins, like I said, they would have been in the mint report. The people who believe that they're circulation strikes believe that they were reported with the mintage of the 1842s in January of 1842. But as I said before, Patterson was a stickler for that, and he would not have allowed that. If they were struck in 1841, then they would have been delivered in 1841. And of course, we don't know when they were struck in 1841 because that die book or proof book that recorded the proofs is unlocated. I've always envisioned going to the National Archives and finding that book and being able to prove and go, aha, here they are. They struck 18 proof 1841 quarter eagles. They struck 3 1842s. They struck 5 1843s. I would love to find that book. If it exists, that would be great. Now, what did get discovered, this was about 4 or 5 years ago, we did find Comparet's book where he listed the mint collection coins starting in 1910. That book had been misplaced. And then the earlier book that listed from the 1850s, I believe around 1858 or 59 through 1909 had been lost. And Dr. Ellen Feingold, the current curator of the Smithsonian, found it just stuck between some books in their bookshelves. And when she found it, I said, I have been looking for this book. It was mentioned by Walter Breen and others. I said, I've been looking for this book for 20 years because it gives the dates that the mint acquired their proof sets each year. So you can look in my recently published proof book, and I list the date that they acquired these coins. Now, we don't know when they acquired the stuff in the 1840s. The earliest date, I believe, is recorded is in the 1850s. After that, we know exactly when they got their proof set each year, whether it was February the 3rd or March the 5th, they required complete proof sets every year. And during the Civil War and after the Civil War, they had to pay with greenbacks, and they had to pay extra money because the greenback was not worth what the gold and silver was worth. So they had to pay the mint themselves had to pay over face value to acquire proof sets that they just struck.
Wow, that's something. These next two questions are in a similar vein. The first one is, when is the next volume of the Proof Coin Encyclopedia coming out?
Yeah,
followed
sure.
by, and what will your next U.S. Proof Coins book cover, and will it come out? Looks like a lot of people are excited.
I'm working on it right now. It's on nickel proofs. I would say I'm probably 80 to 90% done. Unfortunately, or fortunately, during the COVID pandemic, I've had extra time, so I've been working very hard. I've got my daughter and son-in-law down here right now. They're visiting us from Oregon, and I gave them a copy of the book. They're working on the varieties of proof 3-cent nickels, probably the most difficult, although Liberty nickels or V nickels are very tough too. I'm lucky the Shield nickels, that set has been completed by a collector in Washington. He's acquired all the proof varieties, so he's done all my work for me. And then the Indian head or Buffalo nickels is only a few years, and those are pretty simple. So I'm finishing up the 3-cent nickels and the Liberty nickels, and once I've done that, I've already put into the book that it's going to be published in 2021. Now, I can't guarantee that because, as again, I can't tell you exactly how many 1841 quarter eagles were struck or when they were struck or whether they were, like I think, all struck in proof or not. But that's my hope, is that I'll publish it sometime next year.
Looking forward to it for sure. Another attendee would like to know, how does the design of the 1841 quarter eagle compare to those quarter eagles from other mints of the same year, such as Denver?
Well, obviously Denver didn't strike them in 1841, but Dahlonega and Charlotte did. The dies were all made in Philadelphia, and they actually added the mint marks in Philadelphia. So the D's and the C's were punched in. The dies were all made the same way. People used to say, well, the dies, they sent used dies down to Dahlonega, they sent used dies. They did not send used dies. They made the dies the same way, and then the basoning is what is different. Remember me talking about the Morgan dollars from New Orleans? The basoning is different. The reason people say, well, New Orleans didn't strike their coins. They're all weakly struck. No, they're not. They're all struck on steam presses with 120 tons of pressure, just like they did in Carson City, just like they did in San Francisco or Philadelphia. They basined the dies. They sent the dies to the branch mints unhardened, okay, because they didn't want them to get stolen and used. So each branch mint had to basin their dies, and each branch mint basined them slightly differently. New Orleans did differently than Charlotte, which did different than Dahlonega. So as they basined their dies, that determined how they would be struck, because all of those mints had steam presses. So Dahlonega, Charlotte, New Orleans all had the exact same steam press. Those mints opened in 1838, and they struck coins on those steam presses, and the pressure was exactly the same on all the coins. The difference in strike is because of the basoning. And so they would basin, and then they would use some polishing compound. So, and then, you know, if they didn't basin the same way they did in Philadelphia, the strike would be different. And that's why you see different strikes on the different various mints.
That's fantastic. So as we look to wrap up the section, we'll have another last couple questions, but in the meantime, wanted to know how can people like reach you if they have questions, or yeah.
Go to jdrc.com. It's got my email address, my phone number on there. You know, I'm accessible. I don't have as much to do as I did when I was going to coin shows. So I'm doing a lot of writing and research. And I'm still doing coin business, but it's very difficult to do in the COVID environment. So it's difficult. But if you go to jdrc.com, it's got my email address there, and you can send me a question.
Absolutely. We certainly do appreciate all the work you're putting into this. Looks like one last question. After all these years of research, what is your personal conclusion / explanation for the existence of the 1841 quarter eagle? What makes more sense to you personally, considering it wasn't supposed to be according to the 1841 Mint report?
Okay, so exactly what was the question? What is my personal opinion?
Yes.
They were struck as proofs. I think the evidence, again, like I said, the written evidence is not as compelling. It's really a lack of evidence. They weren't in the 41 Mint report. In 1860, James Ross Snowden called them patterns, which is the equivalent of proofs. So the written evidence is scant, but the die evidence, I think, is pretty compelling. If they struck circulation strike 1841 quarter eagles, it would be the only proof-only die that they used to strike circulation strikes. And because the die state stayed the same, I believe that they did not strike 100 or 200 or 300 coins. Now, did they strike some extra ones? Yes. There's 15 or 16 or 17 or 18 known. Why they did that, I don't know. I think they were all proofs. I can't prove that because I wasn't there. I'm old, but I'm not that old. And it's hard to prove that a coin, when it's down to VF or XF, was that blank polished. We know the dies were polished because the same dies struck 41s and 42s and 43s in the same die state. So the dies were identical. If they did strike some of them on unpolished blanks, which to me, I still wouldn't call those circulation strikes because they weren't reported in the Mint report. To me, those would be special strikes. SPs, and maybe they did strike 10 or 15 of those for some event. Somebody came into the Mint and wanted 15 coins to give out for some special event. But we don't know that because there's no evidence of that, but we can't prove that didn't happen either. You know? So, but my personal opinion is I think they were all struck as proofs. Why did they strike extra ones? Why did they strike extra half cents? Why did they strike extra large cents in 1841? Both of those have way more known of the originals than many of the other dates. In fact, I think they're probably the two most common half cents and large cents. I'm not an expert in the half cents and large cents, but I believe that those are the most common original half-cent and large cent proofs from the 1840s. Certainly among the most common.
Absolutely. Well, once again, thank you, John, for such a great presentation. Obviously, a lot of effort and like research went into this, and really shows.
Thank you, Matthew, for hosting it, and thanks NNP for hosting all of these, the entire symposium and all of these presentations. I've watched probably a half a dozen of them, and some of them are just fantastic. You know, I mean, I was so impressed by some of them that I was like, oh my, I hope I can live up to some of these guys, because some of them were just, these people were very polished. They had worked on these presentations for quite some time. I didn't spend as much time on them, on mine as some of these people obviously did. I wish I could have shown more pictures, and I probably, if I'd thought about it, I probably would have included a few more close-ups and some other things to show some of the effects that of dilapping and things like that.
In any case, I thought it was an excellent presentation, and I couldn't agree more. There have been a lot of amazing presentations over these past 3 days. So this is unfortunately our last presentation for the 2020 symposium. We have thoroughly enjoyed having you all here, and have really enjoyed the turnout this year. You all in the audience and those panelists as well will be receiving within the week. We'll be sending out a survey just to collect your all's thoughts on how we did, on how we can look to improve for future matters. We are pleased with how it worked, obviously, with current conditions, and hope to have more events like these in the future. We will be recording all these videos, and we will be posting them within the next couple weeks. So keep an eye out for another email regarding that as well. Once again, on behalf of all of Newman Numismatic Portal, thank you all so much for attending over these past 3 days. Thank you, John, for the presentation, and we hope you all have a wonderful rest of your weekend.